the work. You know, care for the work.
Hello, this is Linda Lysakowski, and I am so excited to introduce you to my podcast guest today, Joanne Oppelt. And Joanne and I have together co-authored 14 quick guide books. I'm sure she'll be telling you about some of the books that she's written, but I don't know how long I know Joanne, but I got to know her actually the first time I edited one, I think the first book she wrote. So Joanne, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what got you into this crazy field of the nonprofit sector.
Well, in high school, I took a job as a church receptionist, and I liked the feeling of serving other people, although I didn't care for the work. It was so. And then after college, I went into teaching and found that I liked the teaching part of what I did. But after about a year and a half, it became rote. So when I went to graduate school, they said, "Do you want to go on to the insurance side of things?" I got a master's in health administration. They said, "Do you want to go on the insurance side of things?" I said, "No, I can't make decisions based on people's health, based on money." They said, "Well, you're perfect for hospital administrator." I said, "Well, it's the same reason I can't make decisions based on people's income levels and neighborhoods. I'm going to go into nonprofits." And ever since I went into nonprofits, my first professional job as a nonprofit leader was program development manager, where I was responsible to grow programs and to find the funding for them so that they could be implemented. And I love it.
Great. I know you've been in nonprofit leadership for a while. So what made you decide that you wanted to move up into leadership? Because sometimes you do make tough decisions in leadership, but what made it worthwhile for you to be in leadership in the nonprofit sector when you weren't interested in those other fields?
Well, I I'm an oldest, so I'm a natural leader in terms of I had four brothers and sisters um, behind me. And I gravitate towards that leadership role anyway. Plus, I like leadership. I have a systems way of thinking in terms of organizational development or in terms of family systems or organizational systems. And I can also see the details. I'm more of a conceptual thinker than I am of a detail thinker, but that just means I surround myself with people who love the details. And I find that role fits really well for me. Early in my career, I got in trouble for being too leadershiply and not knowing my place.
Oh, no. Well, that happens sometimes, doesn't it? But uh, I think, in fact, I think your first book, I think this was your first book. I had the privilege of editing it, was moving into the role of executive director. So, tell us what prompted you to write that, because I think you've learned a lot of lessons that you wanted to share with others as my guest, but I want to hear it from you.
Sure. Well, actually, that was my fourth book,
Oh,
and I wrote it. I wrote it based on my journal entries for my first year of being an executive director at a suicide prevention agency. I was from the field of development. I had been a development director. I didn't know which way was up. This learning curve was steep. I had a board to deal with. I didn't know what I was doing in terms of the board relations. I was guessing. It's lonely at the top. I couldn't talk to really confidentially my staff. I couldn't confidentially talk to my board. I was seeking out other executive directors. And I learned a lot. Like, for example, I knew all about net income and making sure that there was a profit or a positive net income at the end of the year, but I knew nothing about cash flow. So I learned that cash flow is just as important as, or if not more important than net income. Things like that. Also, the awesome sense of responsibility that I felt because now it wasn't only me or a department that I was leading and responsible for, but it was really an organization that was part of the fabric of the community. And I had a responsibility not only to the department, but to my employees and to my community stakeholders who also supported the program.
Yeah, I thought that I knew everything about Joanne, but I just learned something new that that was not her first book. So now I'm going to ask you to go back and tell me about the first book that you wrote and what prompted you to write that. And I'm not sure I'm aware of that book.
The first book I wrote is called Confessions of a Successful Grants Writer. And I
Ah,
wrote it because I was at the time an adjunct professor at Kean University teaching nonprofit management and grant writing. And I couldn't find a really practical, down to earth, affordable textbook. So I wrote this little 100-page jobby doer for my students, and I wrote it very accessible and very friendly and very engaging in second person language, so that they would have a guide to be able to take their theory that they were learning in graduate school and really apply it to something practical in terms of funding to their nonprofit work.
great. And Joanne is probably the only person I know who's written almost as many books as I have because we wrote 14 of them together. But I believe you're up to book number 24 now.
I
So
am.
tell us about that book and what prompted you to write it.
Well, my latest book is Major Gifts Ramp Up. Money is oxygen. Without it, charities can't breathe. And I really wrote it because I had gotten involved in the past 2 or 3 years before I wrote the book with an organization called Major Gifts Ramp Up. And I was becoming a major gifts counselor. And um, I went to a lot of these online virtual events that they were holding, as well as in person ones. And I realized that I didn't retain all of the information that I wanted to retain. And I wanted to learn more and give people who attended the conference something that they could fall back on after the conference. So I wrote the book based on what the conference content was like in terms of explaining the Major Gifts Ramp Up program and the different components. It also turns out to be a great training tool for anybody who wants to learn more about Major Gifts Ramp Up and a jumping off point for anybody who wants to learn about Major Gifts Ramp Up and then attend the conference.
Hmm. What's unique about this book as compared to everything else that you've written up to this time?
Well, the obvious is I co-wrote it with Jimmy LaRose, so there's a new co-author there. In terms of Major Gifts Ramp Up, it's a unique program. It's an innovative program. It's based on research and evidence-based data done by Clemson University, as opposed to just um, stories of what works and what doesn't work in the field. It's more than just personal experience, but it's actually evidence-based data. And there are some surprising things in that data that reveal it. For example, some of the board structures are a little bit different using the Major Gifts Ramp Up model than using the traditional capital campaign or fundraising campaign techniques. There's a different strategic planning or organizational development model that's CEO led and not led by the board of directors. There are a different way to cultivate donors. As the one-on-one cultivation principles are pretty much the same, but you have a non-fundraising awareness event and an ask event, which is unique in the field. And something that is unique to Major Gifts Ramp Up is the three-part ask, where you're dealing with three forms of funding, asking for it all at the same time rather than just one.
Okay. I know the Major Gift Ramp Up has been very innovative, and I've been somewhat involved in it myself, but not as heavily as you are. And I know you've had several clients through Major Gift Ramp Up. Tell us about what makes this program so successful.
Well, what makes the program successful is it's a tried and true method. The method's been around, model's been around for about 30, 35 years. And we've done over $1,300 campaigns so far. The return on investment is incredible. You don't do feasibility studies. Instead, you test case or support and you're doing one-on-one interviews with the people that you're cultivating. So that takes out 6 months worth of costs that you would normally have. And it also takes 6 months out of the timeline so that you're raising more money faster. Even if you raise the same amount, it's higher net income because you don't have the costs, those extra costs. In terms of um, in terms of the quality assurance of the program or the integrity of the program, again, it is based on research that was done by Clemson University, and it's also put in a team environment through the Major Gifts Ramp Up team. And so, as a counselor, I have access to both the team and I function as an independent contractor. So, I feel like I have the best of both worlds. I have the independence that I want as an independent contractor, but I also have the team environment to which to whom I can go with questions and comments, and who can also present themselves to the client. So there's a three-person team rather than one. It only works though if you do what you tell us to do. If you do what we tell you to do. I've had clients not do what I've told them to do. They've raised money, more money than they've ever raised before, but not a lot because they did not follow instructions.
I think that's very common now. You can I've always been amazed that people will pay a consultant and then not do what the consultant tells them to do, but they keep paying, and I'm like, what's wrong? Why aren't you listening to this consultant? That's what you're paying them good money for.
Yeah. And it doesn't change until they get to some sort of pain point that's just too painful for them. And they say, oh, maybe
Right.
we should listen.
Maybe, yeah, maybe it's time we listen to this person we're paying money to every month. But for those of the audience that really are into research, can you tell me a little bit more about? I know you mentioned several times that this Major Gift Ramp Up is research based. And a lot of times I think people just look at, well, this worked and for some organization, so it's going to work for me. But if you can tell us a little bit about the research that was involved, I think that's kind of fascinating that this wasn't just something that came up out of Jimmy's head and he said, oh, I think we're going to try this, that he really
Right.
researched the field before he started.
Yes. Well, the premise of the research is what works in fundraising, what doesn't work in fundraising, what needs to stay and what needs to go, and what needs to be capitalized on. So he engaged Dr. Kathleen Robinson of Clemson University. They did a 5-year longitudinal study of 497 or 487 CEOs who had gotten organizational capacity building grants specifically to grow their agencies in terms of organizational and financial capacity. Then they had a survey question they administered every year, and they compared the successful ones, which is about 15% of them, who had been successful in increasing their organizational capacity, and the ones that had not been successful. They had just got the funding, done the activities, but there was really no change. So they were really looking at what does increasing organizational capacity mean? How do you do it? And how can we standardize this so everybody could do it? What they found was that organizational capacity, first of all, is spearheaded by the strong CEO, not the board. And there's different board structures that empower the board to help the CEO and support the CEO, that were new and innovative at the time in the field, still are. They also found that financial capacity building has to come with program capacity building. So many times founders want to focus on mission, 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 mission. It's so important that I deliver services or deliver programs or however you want to define mission, when in reality, you need to put financial capacity building first. And you need to focus on your donors before anything else. So they took all this research, and Jimmy then said, well, let's turn this into a fundraising model. And that's how he came up with Major Gifts Ramp Up.
I think it's fascinating. In fact, just this morning I was glancing at one of the books that you and I co-wrote together on um, running a successful capital campaign. And I was reading the section that we had in there about the CEO's role. And so many times I've run across CEOs that came from a program background. They're very strong on programs. They know nothing about development and they don't understand how important that strong CEO is. And that was one of the things that really attracted me to Major Gift Ramp Up because I've worked with CEOs that have been, very committed to their program, but they know nothing about finances. They know nothing about um, development. And can you just elaborate a little bit on why that strong CEO is so important? Because I know that's one of the real foundations of the Major Gift Ramp Up that I was very attracted to.
Well, the strong CEO is the CEO, period, is the only one in an organization who can guarantee that resources are going to be allocated in a certain way and guarantee that they're going to be used for their intended purposes. People who are giving 6 and 7 figure gifts want to meet with a CEO. They don't want to meet with anybody else. It's fine to have a development director, again, depending on the size of your organization, to do your 4 and 5 figure gifts. But once you get into the high 6 figure and the 7 figure or 8 figure gifts, you're really talking about the CEO who can guarantee the performance of the organization and the allocation of its resources towards that performance. The strong CEO basically needs to be able to come up with a change management plan in terms of how to get from where they are to where they want to be, and not a board of directors who are volunteers, who know nothing about day to day nonprofit management, who don't like to fundraise, who don't want to fundraise, who get persecuted because we say they're not fundraising. So it gets rid of some of that CEO board tension around fundraising as well as around strategic planning in terms of, typically there's a strategic planning retreat and there's flip charts and there's stickies, and if the world was made of gold and we had all the money in the world, what would we do? And you come up with these plans, somebody writes them down, puts it on a shelf for 2 or 3 years. In 2 or 3 years we go through uh, same process again, and the CEO has done exactly what the CEO wanted to do. Well, it flips that on its side in terms of really directing the CEO in terms of, again, using data from public sources to really define how much would it take to scale our mission and to completely solve the problem that we are addressing, and how much can I get done in the next 3 to 5 years and the next 3 to 5 years after that, so that the idea is that you have something, again, that's not coming out of your head, but that's coming out of data that's verified by other people, that the community can buy into because it is verified by other people, and that you can then make plans, again, unhindered by volunteers who don't know what they're doing and unhindered by uh, any board staff conflict that takes place, board CEO conflict that takes place.
Mhm. One thing that I've always found in my fundraising is that many donors also will respond only to a CEO. In
Yes.
fact, just I tell you a quick story about the community I used to live in. There was a billionaire, and he came to make a presentation to the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And he made it very clear. He said one of the universities that he contributed to sent a development officer to see him, and he said, if you want my money, send the president of the university. I don't want to talk to a development person. I want to talk to the president. And sometimes CEOs, I think in universities, CEOs are now beginning to come from the development side, not so much academia. But in most nonprofits, they come through the ranks of program, and so they feel uncomfortable. But the donors are expecting it. Have you found that with Major Gift Ramp Up, the donors are expecting this?
I have, and I've been working with a client who's it's founder, mission oriented, got to get the programs underway. They spent a year and a half putting the programs first. They're in debt. They have the semblance of a program, but they have no way to fund it and implement it because they have no money because they're in debt. Well, what they did was they got to that pain point, realized that they were throwing good money after bad, and said, we need to hire a strong CEO. And what the founder did was become essentially the chief operating officer, the chief program officer, and then the CEO and the program officer, the COO, go out on visits together for somebody who wants those seven-figure gifts that they're looking for. And that has worked quite well.
Yeah, the other thing that you said that really resonated with me is, and I understand where an organization is really focused on their mission. And I've always described it as your mission is like the lifeblood of your organization, but that blood isn't going to do any good if there isn't oxygen in your system to pump it through your system.
Yeah.
So I think this Major Gift Ramp Up, looking at money is not an evil, dirty thing. Money is the oxygen that pumps your blood, pumps the mission.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, money is oxygen. If you can't breathe, you're going to die. You need mission, but the purpose of raising the money is to scale your mission, to be successful at solving the problem you want to say that you want to solve. Now, if you want to stay in business to service a problem, that's one thing. But I thought we were in the nonprofit field to solve problems and to really make a dent in some of the world's toughest problems. To do that, again, we need a way to rely on what works and what we know works. And Major Gifts Ramp Up, number one, is based on entrepreneurial principles that work in the business world, that we know work in the business world, that are adapted to the nonprofit world. And also the hospital foundations and or healthcare institutions and the educational institutions who are in perpetual campaign mode. This is really opening the curtain and looking behind the curtain and saying, you can do that too. This is how you can have the same success. There's a reason why Harvard has $1 billion in their endowment, and they still can raise money. Success breeds success. So why not start where you know you're going to have some success, follow that model, and then replicate it again and again?
I think that's so true. Can you tell us about, maybe without giving names, maybe one really successful story that you saw through your involvement with Major Gift Ramp Up, that maybe an organization who never thought they could do this ended up doing it?
Sure, I was working with an organization who was 98% government funded. They had millions of their operating budget was around 20-25 million, and like 2% of it came from individual donors. They had 21 individual donors total. And these individuals, donors, there was one who gave at the Major Gifts Ramp Up level who was giving $10,000 a year. What we did was we invited her to a non-fundraising awareness event. We met with her after a non-fundraising awareness event, to listen to her story and to listen to what was important to her. She was already invested. We knew that. We just didn't know how much and in what way. And so I sat there for an hour listening to her, found out her story, and was able to make a $2 million ask because I had listened to her. I had listened to what she was willing to give. I had listened to the financial capacity that she had. And I was right in her right in her alley in terms of what she wanted to fund and what would be meaningful for her. you story listen your way to the gift. You don't necessarily story tell. Yes, you have your 10 minutes or your 5 minutes of introduction, and you talk about mission and vision and you introduce, but basically, you sit there, you ask questions, you listen, and you meet the donor's needs. The donor's need to give is greater than your need to receive.
That is really wise advice. And I think that's one of the things that I was so impressed with when I first attended a major gift ramp up session myself is lately in the last couple of years, there's been this explosion of storytelling workshops, storytelling webinars, storytelling books. And I thought, people don't want to hear your story. They want you to listen to their story and then see how it fits with what your needs are. So I think that's, to me, one of the most valuable things um, that they can learn through Major Gift Ramp Up. But is there anything else in your book that you would highlight as some of the major lessons that they can learn by reading your book?
Well, I each chapter begins and ends with a case study, a real life
Hmm.
case study. I think the probably the most pervasive theme in these case studies is nonprofits raise money through grants, annual appeals, and special events. They may have a uh, a a annual program for funding, but it's generally only 1 year. It's generally low level donors, and they spend a lot of time in their peer to peer campaigns, and they spend a lot of time in their letter writing campaigns, and they spend a lot of time on their special events. And when you look at the ROI, the return on investment, you're not using your time well. So number one, the book explicitly states this is major gifts is what raises the highest ROI, takes the least amount of time, raises the most money at the least amount of cost or using up the least amount of resources than these other things, and explains why. And then it gives the stories of what happened, how this was not meeting nonprofits' needs, and someone who did it dared to do it differently, and what happened in their case. We also that's pervasive throughout the book. We also talk about donor centric fundraising. Usually, a nonprofit is looking at either institutional fundraising, that's where the storytelling comes from. Look at us, look what we're doing, look what good stewards we are with your money. Look at how we compare to others in the field or others in our community. When really what you're doing is coming from the donor's point of view, so that number one, although you have like a case for support that is compelling, you test it with each individual person and you tailor that conversation to what you hear. And as you're developing a cultivation approach with them, we call them individual plans of care, it's tailored to each individual donor and what their needs and preferences are, so that it's not a one size fits all moves management type of thing, but it is actually, you are moving them up the ladder, but you are doing it in a way that honors them, that's not institutional. The other fundraising, common fundraising, is techniques. That's the walkathons and the bowl-a-thons and the mud runs and the galas. If only we get this process down right, then we will raise lots of money. And I have news for you folks, those processes don't work anymore, because that is based on the Clemson University study.
That's really good. I used to live in Las Vegas, which is event city. I mean, you can go to an event in Las Vegas every night of the week, sometimes three or four. And I don't think people realize that there's such a donor fatigue as well as a
Mm.
staff burnout from running these constant events, which may be net, if you're lucky, 50% of what you take in is net profit. So the one thing that you mentioned then before we end, I want to go back to something you said about the three-part ask, because I think that's so important that people aren't nickel and dime. Like this week we're having an event. Next week we're sending our annual appeal letter, and next month we're gonna have a rubber ducky race. people get so tired of that. Now we need a capital campaign. So
Right.
tell us a little bit about three-part ask and why that's so successful.
So it is rooted in your case, it's presented in your case for support as part of the budget. There's an operational ask or an annual fundraising goal. There is a capital ask or a one-time project goal, not necessarily a lot of capital, but one-time project. You put in new programs that you're going to start, and you also do an endowment goal in terms of reserve funds or money for a rainy day or something to put aside like that. What you're doing when you go to ask, because you've done organizational development, you know how success you define success, you know how much it's going to cost to reach there. You've scaled your fundraising efforts to meet the yearly timelines that it would come. You're doing a 3 to 5 year campaign. So you go to a person and you say, we thought you would like to support our continuing operations at $100,000. We thought you would like to have one of these new buildings named after you for $500,000. And not tonight, but in a couple weeks, I'd like to get a hold of you to talk about what role your estate plan could make. Number one, you have a 3 year commitment. It's less time on you and less time for the donor. Number two, you've presented your whole budget, not just one piece of it, but the whole budget, all the revenues, all the expenses. They know exactly what they're supporting. And what that does is, it's very common in business. It's your 30,000 foot investment perspectives. It tells people exactly what you're going to do, exactly where it fits in, and exactly how much you need. And you're not, again, doing it because you think this is a round number or because they can give X amount, but it's based in what do you need to meet this community issue that this donor happens to be interested in.
Thanks, Joanne. This has been really fascinating. We could probably talk for hours and hours about this, but I think there's so much to learn first of all through your book, and we're going to give everybody a link to purchase the book to learn more about Major Gift Ramp Up program, and hopefully, if you're lucky, you'll get Joanne as your counselor with that program. Um, and also we'll give them an email that they can touch base with you directly, because I think people have a lot of questions about that. It is innovative. It's a different approach than perhaps you're accustomed to, but I have found it really fascinating. And I know Jimmy LaRose for more years than I care to even think about. I met him way before I ever met Joanne. And when she reintroduced him to me, it was like really fantastic. So I think it's a program that you should really look into, because it does save you time, and in the long run, it saves you money, and you're going to raise a lot more money. But before we wrap up, Joanne, is there anything that we missed talking about that you would like to add?
I don't think so. I think that I would direct people at this point to the brand new launch of the website, the new Major Gifts Ramp Up website.
Mm,
And in it, you will see that we do fundraising campaigns, capital campaigns, endowment campaigns, and what we call replacement campaigns for those nonprofits who are losing a large chunk of their funding. It's all covered under Major Gifts Ramp Up, because then you are making the 3 part ask. You're not just asking for one of those, but it does go through, it has a lot of return on investment information in terms of how much it costs these nonprofits to do Major Gifts Ramp Up and what their budgets are today and how much they've realized because of it. There's testimonials. It's really, really, really a good source of information. And it can be found at majorgiftsrampup.com. The book is available on Amazon. Just type in Major Gifts Ramp Up and you'll find it.
great. And I think this is really valuable to our anybody listening. If you want to cut your workload by 2/3 and do a three-part ask all at one time, trust me, it's a valuable tool. And I want to thank Joanne, not just for being my guest today, but for being my friend, my co-author, my confidant, and I don't know, just about everything else. We talk almost daily, it seems, when she's not
Yes.
traipsing all over the country with her clients. But I want to thank you, Joanne, for being my guest today. And don't forget to look for the book, look up the Major Gift Ramp Up, and get in touch with Joanne if you have any questions at all about anything that we've been talking about. So, Joanne, I again want to thank you for everything you've enlightened us with today.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks.